good day 2 of JSConf. I hope you have had your coffee and you are ready. My name is Kate. Last year I did a coding boot camp in London called Founders and Coders. We actually finished 1 year ago this week, so happy anniversary to FAC 14. And now I'm a junior engineer at the Financial Times in London. And I have 2 beautiful guinea pigs named Mopsa and Phoebe. In my free time, I love to make weird noises and what some people might call music with code. So I loved music. Growing up, I learned to play the piano, and as soon as I could join band at school in 6th grade, I did. I wanted to play the flute, but my hands were too small to reach all the holes on the flute, so I went for French horn instead. And later on, I learned trumpet for jazz band and mellophone for marching band. I was a pretty die-hard band nerd all the way up to my brief stint at university in the States. But nowadays, I keep up with my musical side by playing piano on a keyboard with my headphones plugged in, which is much more friendly in a rented apartment in London than a very loud French horn, and going out to clubs and festivals. So I feel it's inevitable that once I found my way to coding last year, I was going to end up doing things with sound and music. I started small, experimenting with the web audio API, just toggling sound on and off to create Morse code. Eventually that turned into this Morse chat, a nearly useless chat room that, unless you can read or listen to Morse code and understand it, and good luck if there's a bunch of people in the room, it gets pretty chaotic. Lots of boop, boop, boop going on all at the same time. And then my love of acid techno and growing fascination with sound design through the web audio API led me to try and recreate the sound of the Roland TB303 sequencer, a sound made famous by the rise of acid techno and acid house in the 90s. Oh, that's so weird. Quite zoomed in, okay. So yeah, with each project, my knowledge has grown a little more, and not just around the use of the web audio API, but other parts of coding as well. So when I decided that I wanted to try out machine learning, I thought that it also felt natural that music would be my entry point. I don't remember why I landed on the idea of a webcam theremin. My notes app was really unhelpful, reminding me why, and it kind of worries me that this was my thought process at 6:30 in the evening and not like 3:30 in the morning. But at this point, you might be wondering still what a theremin even is. So if you don't already know, I'm going to get that out of the way. And instead of trying to explain, it might be better to just show you. And that's it. Now you know what a theremin is. Bye. So that was Leon Theremin himself playing the instrument that he invented. And I hope that you're as intrigued as I was when I first heard it and learned about it, because the history and physics of the theremin is fascinating. So I'll ease you in first with the history and wait for your coffee to kick in before we get to the physics. Lev Sergeyevich Termin, aka Leon Theremin, was a physicist in Russia in the early 1900s. He was working in a lab trying to measure the density of gases in a chamber, and perhaps because he was also a classically trained musician, he thought, what would happen if he added a sonic element? Could he use the resulting noise to indicate the measurements? What he actually discovered was that the haunting noise that came out was responding not only to the gases in the chamber, but also his hands as he moved them near the device. He had accidentally discovered an entirely new principle, that an electromagnetic field around an antenna could be affected by moving your body into the field. And you effectively became part of the electromagnetic circuit. And again, because he was a musician, he used his he used his scientific discovery to create this haunting instrument that he called the etherphone, but would eventually become called a theremin after his Americanized name. So Theremin demonstrated his new instrument for Vladimir Lenin, who liked it so much that he sent theremin on a world tour showing it off. In America, a chance meeting with a young musical prodigy meant that the theremin instrument was destined to become more than just another weird electronic experiment. From an early age, it was obvious that Clara Rockmore was going to be a musical virtuoso, picking out piano tunes before she could even speak, reading music at age 3, demonstrating perfect pitch, where you can sing a given note like A sharp without having to hear it first. Mariah Carey also has perfect pitch. She had a promising career as a world-class violinist, but severe tendinitis in her bow arm forced her to give up her craft. And then, one night, she went with a friend to a hotel where a young scientist and musician from Russia was demonstrating his new instrument, the theremin. She was fascinated by it and saw in it an opportunity to take up music again without the strain of the violin. Leon Theremin was equally fascinated and astounded when Clara approached him to play the instrument and was able to conjure music from thin air on an instrument that she'd never seen or played before, an instrument that was totally foreign in every way to what people knew. So Clara and Leon worked together for years to develop the theremin into a respected orchestral instrument, and Clara Rockmore became famous for her emotional, ethereal performances on the theremin. Meanwhile, this was making an impression on a young Robert Moog. Moog was forced to learn the piano by his parents, but he much preferred to spend time tinkering on things with his father, an electrical engineer. When he was 14, Moog built a theremin using plans found in the magazine Electronics World and became captivated by the weird electronic sounds that it made. After completing a degree in physics and a master's and PhD in electrical engineering, he founded Moog Music, which at first was a company that made the first commercially available theremins. That's all they did. But then Moog Music went on to make the world's first commercially available synthesizers. Considering that before, synthesizers were prohibitively expensive and literally filled entire rooms just like old computers used to, it's no doubt that Moog was in large part responsible for the rise of electronic music that followed, since musicians were more able to get their hands on this new way of making sounds. And we can probably thank Moog's lifelong obsession with theremins and their weird electronic wails for putting him on the path towards giving us the commercial synthesizer. Unless you think that the theremin was left behind in the age of black and white photos and video, there's still musicians like Carolina Ike creating beautiful music with the theremin as their instrument of choice. And this is her playing The Ecstasy of Gold from the Western movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Quite beautiful, I think. But yeah, so now on to the physics. So theremins, it starts with a capacitor. And a capacitor stores electric charge, and it's made up of two conductive plates with something non-conductive between them. So when you put electricity through them, oh my gosh, that is so zoomed in. Oh well. So when you put electricity through the plates, the electricity can't flow through the non-conductive thing between, so positive charge builds up on one side and negative charge on the other. And then the electrons flow down the other side, and the positive and negative sides switch. And this happens over and over, creating an alternating current that oscillates at a certain frequency. And in a theremin, there's only one capacitor plate, so your hand becomes the other plate, and you as the thereminist complete the capacitor. However, the frequencies produced by the theremin are in the 250,000 hertz range. This is in the ultrasonic range, meaning that we can't hear it. Humans have a hearing range of 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz at the best of times when we're young, before we start going to all the techno clubs. 250,000 hertz is actually even higher than the range bats, who echolocate with ultrasound, can perceive. So quite high. So Leon Theremin solved this by making use of another recently discovered electrical engineering principle in the early 1900s, heterodyning. In a heterodyne mixer, two oscillator waves are mixed. One is a fixed frequency oscillator inside the theremin, and the other oscillator is the frequencies that you produce by interacting with the theremin by moving your hands, which is changing. The mixer outputs only the difference between the two oscillators, called the beat frequency, bringing the range of the instrument down into the range of human hearing. Every musical instrument is a combination of many sound waves created and interacted with by your physical touch and breath. But not only do you play the theremin without touching it, you're actually interacting with the thing that produces the sound waves themselves. How awesome is that? So now that you hopefully have an idea of how ridiculously cool the theremin is, let's build one. The Web Audio API gives us the ability to make music in the browser, and it's made up of many types of nodes that you can string together like a real audio engineer using bits of hardware to create sounds as simple or as complex as you want. So for example, this is a typical graph used to show how you design an analog synthesizer. The VCOs are voltage-controlled oscillators. VCF and VCA are the voltage-controlled filter and amp. And ASDR stands for attack, decay, sustain, and release, which helps shape each individual note that's played. Similarly, the Web Audio API gives you the same capabilities. It gives you oscillator nodes to make the sound, gain nodes to control the strength of different signals coming from other nodes, filter nodes to shape the sounds, and even ways to create your own waveforms with calculus. You can do nearly anything on the Web Audio API that you can do with hardware sound design. But where do we even start? Unsurprisingly, I'm not the first person to try and recreate the sound of the theremin using other electronic methods. The theremin's the kind of instrument that prompts obsession, and people have been trying to emulate its sound and asking others how to do it, probably as long as the web's been around. So I found this article from a website called Sound on Sound from June 1999, captured on the Internet Archive in 2004, because the actual article doesn't exist online anymore. So I'm really glad that the Wayback Machine exists. It's someone talking about how to use synthesizers to mimic the theremin sound. And it talks about how you can take a normal oscillator wave, add a low frequency modulating oscillator, and then further shape the sound with filters. So let's build up the sound bit by bit. So the first thing you do with the Web Audio API is that you create an audio context, and you can think of that as like the big sandbox that you're going to play in and make all of your sounds. All of the sounds exist in the audio context. And then you can create an oscillator, which will have a frequency. So we'll use 440 hertz, which is also known as the A that orchestras tune against. So if you've ever gone to see an orchestra and they play the like boom at the beginning, that's the tuning note A440. And then we have different kinds of oscillators. So we have a sine wave, which is your normal, very curvy wave. You have the sawtooth, which is very jagged, triangle, and square. And all of these waves have different sound qualities to them. And then you connect your oscillator to the audio context destination, which in most cases is just the speakers that you're going to be hearing. So I'm going to play for you a sine wave, followed by a triangle wave, followed by a sawtooth wave. So yeah, they all have very different qualities to them. And remember the heterodyne mixer. So in the same way, we can use one signal to modulate another here to get the sounds that we want. So in this case, we create a low frequency oscillator that we actually can't hear. So you can see that we're setting the frequency to 6 hertz per second. And if you remember, 20 is about the lowest that humans can hear. But what that does is when we attach it to our main oscillator, the one that's at 440 hertz, the 6 hertz frequency modulates the main oscillator, and we hear a beating at 6 pulses per second. And we can control how strong this beating is perceived through the LFO's gain, where gain is the power of the signal. So that's going at 6 hertz per second. Maybe that's not quite as much as we want to hear. And so that's giving us like a little bit of a vibrato, like an actual theremin. So we're getting closer to the sound that we want. And the last piece of the puzzle is shaping our wavering note with filters. Of interest to us is the bandpass filter and the low-pass filter. The bandpass filter allows you to set a central frequency, and all frequencies around it taper off in the strength of their signal the further away they get from the center. So here, our band centers around 400 hertz, for example. So that will be the loudest frequency, and then the loudness tapers off as we hear frequencies on either side. And the low-pass filter sets a cutoff frequency, so here, for example, 1,000 hertz, and everything above it has its signal lessened. So low-pass filters let lower frequencies through, so it can often have like a muffling or underwater sounding effect. So to further shape our theremin sound, we'll first add a bandpass filter, and that has the effect of making the sound just kind of less harsh overall, a bit more muffled, and then the low-pass filter on top of that lessens the harshness of higher frequency sounds, which you won't really hear in this example, but when we play the actual theremin, it helps to keep it less buzzy. So now it's starting to sound like an actual theremin. And when we put it all together, our audio node graph looks something like this, and it helps us to visualize how our signals are combined and processed to create the theremin sound. And so now that we have our theremin sound, how are we going to control the pitch? With our hands, of course, just like a real theremin. So now we come to the machine learning bit, which previously might have been a pretty insurmountable obstacle for a junior developer like me before TensorFlow. TensorFlow is an open source library that you can use to define, train, and run machine learning models entirely in the browser. And I think it takes an incredibly complicated subject with a high bar to entry and makes it more easily accessible to people just getting started, like me. And you don't even have to define and train your own models to begin with. TensorFlow comes with a growing library of pre-trained models that can help you do things like classify the content of images, detect objects in a photo or video and their positions in it, and estimate poses and the positions of a person's body parts in an image, and more. And that last one was of particular interest to me at first. You may have seen PoseNet. It's a model that takes in an image or video of a person or people, and it draws stick figure estimations of the poses over the top. Body parts like hands, feet, arms, head, and torso are labeled, and you can get estimations of their poses in the frame. And in fact, one of the first things I found when researching my theremin was that someone had already built a webcam theremin using PoseNet. However, the one thing PoseNet can't do is detect the distance of your hands from the camera. They're just single points in the frame, X and Y. And what I really wanted to do was to create a webcam theremin that had the same mechanic of action as a real theremin, moving your hand closer and further away from your body to change the pitch. So thankfully, a little more searching led me to a library called handtrack.js by Victor Dibia. In this library, Victor has taken TensorFlow's main object detection model, Coco SSD, and has retrained it with a data set of hand photos so it identifies just hands. And while handtrack.js doesn't return the estimated distance of the hands from the camera, you'll notice that it does have bounding boxes drawn around the hands, and that we can use. So first, we will load our handtrack model and set some parameters for it. So in this example, we're telling the model that we want to identify maximum 2 boxes, because hopefully 2 hands. And we don't want it to predict that something is a hand unless it's more than 80% sure that something is a hand. And once we load our model, we can turn on video by hitting that toggle button, which we'll call this function. And once we start the video, the run detection function is where all of the fun happens. Inside that, we start making predictions of where hands are in the image based on the model, and we render them onto the canvas with those blue bounding boxes. And we can then look at the array of predictions and get more information about where in the frame hands are. So I'll show you a quick example. So you can see we're starting to get an array of predictions there. And it looks like this. So for each hand that it identifies, we'll have an object that returns a bounding box array, which tells us the x position, the y position, the width, and the height of the estimated hand, the object class, which for this will always be hand, and the score of how confident the model is that the object is a hand. And so in this case, about 83%. And knowing what we know about how theremins work, we can use this to create our sound. So for one hand, we can use the Y position moving up and down to control the volume. And for the other hand, we can use the width and the height to calculate the relative area in the frame and use that to control the pitch. So let's work with one hand at a time to make sure we're getting it right. To calculate the volume, we work with the height of the video, the video frame. And what that math on the left is doing is illustrated on the right. So we map the height of the video frame, the y-axis, to our range of volume between 0 and 1, 0 being no volume, and 1 being maximum volume. And we give a bit of buffer at the top and bottom of the frame so that we don't have to hold our hand almost off screen to achieve 0 or full volume. And with pitch, we can also set the range of our theremin. So here it's about 3 octaves from C3, above middle C, to C6, and we set that in hertz. And then we set a range for the areas, so the x times the width times the height of the detected hand in the image. I console logged a lot of areas with my hand to see what they were and ended up choosing 9,000 to 80,000, but they could be changed, or you could even have the person playing the theremin set it at the beginning. And then we use these maximums and minimums and map them to each other so that we know when we hit a certain area with our hands, we should be hearing a certain frequency. And I'm going to try and do a bit of a demo here. I don't think it likes the backlighting very much, but you kind of heard a little bit of it. Okay. So yeah, putting it all together. So what I did was I created a theremin class that interacts with a globally declared audio context, and then we create our oscillator and our main volume. And we want to be able to stop and start the theremin and change the frequency when we want to as well. And so we'll create set frequency, set volume, and set waveform methods with our theremin class to be able to do that. And we can feed our calculations from handtrack.js into these methods to be able to change the frequency and volume. And we want to be able to start and stop the theremin. So when we call play, we'll create our oscillators and our filters and our gain. I've just put one oscillator here to not overwhelm you with a lot of code on the slide. And then we'll set the frequency, the initial volume, and waveform like sine or triangle. And then we'll use our other methods to interact with the volume and frequency while it's live. And when we call stop, we stop the oscillator. And last but not least, we'll add the functionality to turn the video on and off to that toggle button that we saw earlier. And when we toggle it on, it calls the start video function we defined earlier, which starts to return the predictions of where the hands are. And we'll also instantiate our theremin and start it playing very quietly. And when we toggle it off, we'll stop looking for hands and stop the theremin. So Clara Rockmore once said of playing the theremin, you have to have courage. Playing the theremin is like being a trapeze artist without a net. You don't know if you'll land correctly or not, but you take the risk and you jump. So with that in mind, I'm going to take the risk of doing another live demo that combines all the stress of demoing your code, plus the stress of musical performance and the uncertainty of the theremin. So we'll see. It didn't do well at detecting one hand, so I guess we'll see how well it does at detecting two hands. Yes. Whew. Thank you, Mopsa, for helping me to calm down. Isn't she cute? I miss her. Okay, so when I started building this and thinking about the talk that I was going to write about it, I wondered what the takeaways would be. Would there be any takeaways? Would I just get up here and be like, look at this cool thing I made? And after a bit of thinking, I decided that that could be one of the takeaways. And what I want is for you to be able to get up here and do a similar thing. We come to conferences to learn and to make connections, and hopefully also to be inspired and get new ideas. So the only reason I'm up here is because I saw other coders getting excited about their cool and wonderful and weird projects that came out of indulging the what-ifs that crossed their mind, or combining their non-coding interests with their craft. And I think that sometimes we let things stop us from building these projects and being proud of them and showing them off. I was really worried that if I didn't get up here and show you a theremin using a TensorFlow model that I trained myself with a data set based on my own hands with sound I didn't build up from scratch, and if the demo didn't go perfectly, which it obviously didn't, I was going to be a failure. But I don't think that's the case. And yeah, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. TensorFlow exists to make things easier for you. People like Victor Dibia are making libraries like handtrack.js, so you can get started building something that you're interested in with a low barrier to entry. And then if you want to go deeper and learn about it more in depth later, you can. But the important part is that you have that bite, that thing that gets you hooked on machine learning or web audio or whatever it is, because you can jump right in without knowing a lot and create. So yeah, I've kind of had my intro to machine learning. I'm definitely going to keep refining this and go deeper and like hopefully learn how to train my own model and make this buggy thing better. But I think the important thing is that I got started and I made something. So like I said, I want you to do this too. Indulge the wild and fun and creative ideas that cross your mind, or think about your other passions and interests and hobbies and how that could inform your coding. Give yourself permission to build these things however works best for you, and not just to build these things, but also be proud of them and shout about them. I want us all to keep making cool stuff and sharing it and inspiring each other. So thanks for listening, and I hope you always keep learning and building awesome things.